Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. We are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness, an all-encompassing app that has programming for all levels of backcountry enthusiasts and has you covered whether you have access to a full gym or no equipment at all. Visit mountaintough.com and use the promo code OKS30 for a free 30-day trial. Now, my guest today is a native of Utah and is an astoundingly accomplished artist. His works have been featured in galleries across the globe, but what's most interesting to me, personally, is that many of these works depict trapping and other waning Western ideals. On top of his professional career and large social media following, he's an active hunter, trapper. Nicholas Coleman, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. And for those listening, we were connected via a mutual friend, but it comes down to it that a lot of the artwork that you've been putting out, I've seen through social media, and I've been very drawn to it for a lot of different reasons that I hope we'll get into on the show. But first and foremost, one of the standing questions I have on the show is, can you recount to me the first memory you have of being exposed to trapping?
I can, very vividly, actually. So I grew up in the kind of the river bottoms of Provo, Utah, which is in Utah County, and we're kind of in the shadows of the Wasatch Front, more specifically Squaw Peak. Then there's Y Mountain and Provo Peak that are all kind of on the east of us. And as a little kid, my dad, thank goodness, he grew up also in Provo, Utah, in a teeny tiny house in South Provo, about 10, 15 minutes from our house now. His dad worked on the railroad. His mom encouraged him. My father's also an artist. And so growing up in my dad's studio, which is you can see it a little bit behind me, was definitely like this. I just loved everything he did, all the little animals. And we've caught baby skunks together and raised deer and antelope, and we're kind of the unofficial wildlife rescue family as well in our neighborhood now where we live and where we used to live down in the river bottoms. But just before school, when I was in grade school, and maybe even when I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, he had a trap line, and we were also this is also kind of funny. Our neighborhood had two rivers that used to come in and go out, so we had a pond. And so for our neighborhood, we were kind of the muskrat trappers of our we thought it was fun. Everyone else was just happy we were getting rid of the muskrats. So that was kind of fun. And then we lived next to a golf course kind of, and we also would take care of their muskrat problems too, because they, damaging of the ponds and the rivers and people were golfing. And it was, we didn't get paid or anything, but we just had a fun time doing it. But before school, he and I would get up early and go check our traps, and we'd set traps, and so I credit this as some of my education into the art world and looking closely at details. And nowadays, what's crazy is 20 years into an art career, when I first started, there was a few hundred maybe Western wildlife and art artists out there, and my father as well, when he was my age and younger, there was even half of that, and now there's tens of thousands of people that were kind of, you want to say, up against or in competition, because it all businesses, and you're trying to put the best work out there, and nowadays everyone has Google and they don't have to go anywhere. I was talking to an artist at a show once. Sorry, that's all. I kind of meander with my ideas, but they do go back to where your original question was. What blew me away is one artist told me he was painting a big blown up picture of a mountain lion head, and it was great. And somebody at this gallery, a collector or just somebody that happened to be in the gallery, goes, "Oh, did you take this photograph? Did you go out in the wild and see this mountain lion?" He goes, "Oh no, I would never go out. That would be too scary. I would never do that. I just Googled this and I projected it, traced it, and now I'm painting it." And my brain was blown away. Like, how would, and he had no problem, it was, to me, it was like a confession. And he just had no problem admitting that. And in his eyes, that was perfectly fine. And I've learned over the years, because I have, funny rules that I follow in my own brain and how I approach my process. I thought, man, he's missing out on so much of the experience when it comes to painting wildlife art, in my opinion. And he's robbing himself of those wonderful experiences. I don't care if they're scary or not. That's what makes it memorable. That's what makes it unique and unique to that person. Because someone else went and did the work, and he got onto Google, which is the easiest thing in the world to do, and you can find any kind of photograph you want, really, this day and age. And so I think back to my father and I, and setting the little scent stick up above, and we know where the whole where the muskrat swims underneath. And he's told me funny stories of not drowning that muskrat or that mink, and having to he's been bitten a few times, and so I mean not how to get bit. And but just before the sun came up, and just some cold mornings, and hold on a second, this is my old son real quick. He's gonna wander through here.
That's all good. Well, we love cameos.
Yep, out mowing the lawn for me this morning. But just the things you get to see when no one else is around, the frozen river banks, and the cold fingers and the cold hands, and the funnest part too is him teaching me how to skin a muskrat, and how delicate those little noses and little ears are. And I remember I ruined my first few I ruined because I was too impatient. And even the smells are just so I love seeing it on Instagram, because it's obviously it's not a popular subject. This day and age, everyone thinks they're so sophisticated, and we're, as a species, as human beings, we're evolved past this, but we're really not. I mean, people, thank goodness, still eat meat, and I think they should eat meat. And if people know where all of their everything comes from, the more educated they are, the more accepting you are, and I think the more well-rounded as a human being, understanding how it all works, and not outsourcing your killing or whatever you want to, call it. But yeah, some of those early memories have stuck with me, and I see photographs sometimes, and the smell comes back to me, or a certain time of year comes back to me, and just funny experiences and wonderful experiences I had with my dad, and I was at Safari Club a few weeks ago in Nashville. I haven't been in a few years, but there are these knife makers that I bought a skinning knife for my dad, but it had a neat little, this isn't it, but instead of just coming up to a tip, it rounded over the top and went down the other side. And I thought, oh my gosh, that would be the most perfect little thing to skin with. And he showed his friend, and they're searching the company, and buying a few for their friends. And anyway, so I sometimes I go on tangents, but it always comes back to these fun experiences that I think make my job more fun, more memorable, and then I'm able to share my enthusiasm with like-minded people like yourself. So,
well, I think the enthusiasm, talking about your youth and those exposures on the trap line, like, let me ask, what year was that about when you were that age going out on the trap line?
this is probably late, middle of the 1980s, early 90s. And even my dad's funny stories. I mean, he had a trap line to make money in South Provo, and he said the most he ever got for muskrat skin was about $1.10, is what he said.
Well, it's funny. The reason I ask is, it sounds like that was just past the last fur boom, which we had in the late 70s, early 80s, before the bottom kind of dropped out a little bit. And I've talked to a lot of trappers who, were making money, buying new trucks and supporting their families just on their trap line. So it sounds like it was a little after that, but the attention to detail is something that I'm very interested in. And I know nothing about art as far as the practice of. The appreciation of, is something that I do love. I've been to galleries all across the world, whether that's in Moscow, whether that's in London, San Francisco. I love art. But the attention to detail is something I don't really understand. So I'd love if you talked a little bit, like, was your dad's an artist too, correct?
Right, yeah.
Was your dad painting anything related to the trapping you guys did? Like, were you able to vividly see the attention to detail that went into actually trapping muskrats translate to artwork? Or was that something that you just kind of picked up on and then applied later in life?
a little bit of both. In my dad's paintings specifically, he would paint uh, like he gravitated towards kind of Native American culture and mountain man culture, and he did a lot of rendezvous things back in the '70s. And so I have stacks of photographs. I can even, since we're on camera, I can actually
Yeah.
show a nice stack what I'm talking about.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
so this is kind of more. This is my more very. This is my Google. Is his photographs, our photographs, and things that we've done together. And so we even had a lot of Native American models come to the studio, my dad's studio, when I was little, and kind of pose for my dad.
Oh wow.
And I have, here's a mink we had for a little bit.
Yeah, but for those that are only on audio, we're holding up some like what size is that photo, you think? Like
Oh, 4x6
yeah,
photograph.
of a
And
beautiful mink.
yeah, and here's one of my dad, bear hunting.
Oh, awesome.
And these are just kind of random photographs, but this is Boy Scouts rabbit hunting out across Utah Lake. Uh, like some fishing and.
So you were documenting between you and your dad all these adventures that you were doing on a what sounds like near daily basis as the motivation for your father's art and then eventually your own art. It was just life encapsulated in art. If I'm like as an outsider looking in,
Definitely.
and
So
what came first, the chicken or the egg? Meaning, was your dad a hunter trapper first turned artist, or was it an artist that then found motivation and decided to go all in into this outdoor lifestyle?
yeah, my father and I have talked quite a bit about exactly what you're asking about. So when he was just a little kid, he said he used to have dreams where he would miss the opening day of fishing season, and then he couldn't wait to go trapping. And like his first 12 gauge single shot JC Higgins shotgun bought with proceeds from his trapping. And he said and then when he was a little kid too, he shot a bird, and he said, remember holding the bird in his hand, and he goes, "This is amazing. How am I going to remember this?"
Mm.
Young to have a camera, the color photographs didn't exist, I don't think, just yet. And his mom told him, "You can draw it," and like his brain just kind of turned on. And his mother encouraged his artwork, and so in school, a lot of times when he would draw, his teachers would let him do whatever he wanted. If the classwork would move someplace else and he was still drawing, they would let my dad continue to do what he was doing. I actually do think he was, over the years, I've heard all kinds of funny stories, and I don't think he sees it the way I see it, hearing the stories. I think he was a very unique individual in what his interests were, and he was. I think he was fairly smart too, looking at his whole lifetime and what he's been able to accomplish with the very limited resources. I mean, they were, very poor growing up in Provo, Utah. Like I said, his dad worked on the railroad, and this just what he's told me. He would set up his canvases on top of his roof and paint the mountains, and all of it, every extra little money went to artwork and to trapping and hunting and fishing. And I think just like I say, his early interest of animals and trapping and I think in his brain just kind of went, well, what can I do with? I can draw this, and so he just, like he told me, he didn't go to very many school dances. He was too trapping and fishing and hunting, and he doesn't. He in his eyes, he does not feel like he missed out on that part of his life. And he's been very unique and very very self motivated and driven into what he's wanted to do when it was come to artwork. And as a little kid, my life just seemed like normal, following my dad around, and we're hunting and we're fishing and we're doing this. And of course, I wanted to do that, and I begged him in his studio to paint on his paintings, and he was very nice. Would mark off a spot for me, and I would paint that spot, and then sometimes I'd sneak in and do my own thing. And I figured, since I'm not getting in trouble, that I must be doing a great job. I'm sure he would just laugh and paint over whatever I was doing, but he always made it fun, and he was a good dad in that he'd give me books to read as well on the mountain men, the historians, life and death on the Yellowstone, and grizzly bear attack story books, And to me, that was all just magic and all the lore that and the romance that came with the early West and these early explorers. And to this day, I mean, I still haven't painted everything that I've ever learned about. And like I said, the only hardship sometimes is the competition, because there's so many other people out there kind of doing what I'm doing, but they're all at the same galleries and the same locations. And so it's just a matter of being able to share my vision and my experiences the way and present it the way I want to. And it can be tricky sometimes, but and my dad and I talked about it. We can't worry about anybody else but ourselves, and we can only, put our best foot forward and our best work and make sure everything's quality that we're letting out into the world. So.
And it's interesting. Like, you touched on so many things that I want to double click on. First, though, you answered one of my questions, which was, is Western lore always and has been your main subject area? And I think the answer is an unequivocal yes. But the second thing is, you mentioned a little while ago of how when you started, your dad's been in it for a while, but when you started kind of producing artwork that's being featured in galleries, that there were maybe several hundred kind of Western focused artists, maybe a little bit more, but now you're to the tunes of thousands. And you mentioned the guy who had painted this great picture of a cougar head, but was unwilling to go out and experience it himself. Do you see a distinction in artwork? Like, maybe you can't walk into a gallery, but is this kind of your competitive advantage, that you are out there, you are having these true experiences and can express it through artwork inevitably better than somebody who doesn't can? And how do you define that? Can you define that?
I think so. And some of the best compliments I've got over the years, and I've heard all kinds of funny compliments for other artists, myself sometimes included, but the best one I've ever heard from people that say come to my show up in Jackson Hole will say something like, oh, I felt like I've been here before. Where is this? Is this in such and such a place? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, but it has that look and it has that feel, and there's an atmosphere that is tangible because you've experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell, as an artist, I can, and just my cumulative knowledge of the art history that I've studied over the years, I have a fairly good eye to see, whose paintings are whose, and especially if they're good artists, say like Winslow Homer or Thomas Moran or Albert Bierstadt. I know who the painter was just by looking at a corner, of a painting or something. And then with some contemporary living artists, I have a harder time knowing. I know quite a few, but sometimes I know that they've skipped the going there part. Mm. Like it might, from across the room, it might feel like a movie poster. It can look impressive, very impressive, but it kind of has a slick poster of quality to it. And if you get closer, from across the room might be great. You get closer and you realize that they didn't quite know how to, even though it's been, projected or something, just like the bushes don't quite feel right. They don't read quite right, but it still looks great. And sometimes it's reflected in the price sometimes, because sometimes they're new. They don't, they have not quite established just yet. And a lot of people can do it better. And I think part of the patience when it comes to projecting is having the patience to draw every single thing. And I think a lot of people aren't, they want to skip the hard bits and go right to the big important parts. So a lot of times you'll be able to tell if it's projected. Here's like a little test. If the subject matter is bigger than anything else going around in the actual place. And advice my dad gave me when I was younger is like, he says, oh, paint whatever you're painting, make sure the landscape is painted, to your best ability, that you could almost place anything, any animal, any subject, figurative, into that, and everything will be correct because you painted the landscape properly first. And like I said, there's all kinds of funny rules that we hold ourselves to as artists, and so I guess maybe some people don't have those rules. But those are kind of rules I've done for myself, is try to make sure everything reads right, and in my mind done properly, so certain things are done the right way. if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it's interesting to me as a trapper, a hunter, when I do see artwork, and maybe I don't have the appreciation to say, oh, it's because of this landscape that's so detailed that makes me feel it. But what I know is a feeling of if I see a beautiful painting of a trapper bent over, placing a trap in a river in buckskin, I might not have ever felt being in a buckskin, but I also know what it feels like to maybe look at a beautiful spring morning, but also know what it feels like to be freezing your ass off in a river, holding a metal trap together, feeling the pain in your individual joints from the cold and, seeing your breath. Like that's a beautiful depiction. But if I can also immediately feel like my joints kind of tingle and be like, oh, like I feel the joy and that beauty, but also the pain and what the reality of that um, is kind of my measure. And I think that's what you're getting to is that ability to cast that. And when you have people giving you compliments like, oh, is this at such and such place? Because they're probably feeling that internally, which
Hmm.
I don't know how you translate it. Like that's voodoo to me and it's
Yeah,
amazing. But
like it's one of those funny things that you it wasn't on purpose, but it ends up being one of the consequences.
mhm.
And it's funny you mentioned that. My dad said his brother, when they'd go out together, my dad said his hands were always so sensitive to the cold, and that hurt. Like I say, it hurt down to your joints. His brother had no problems getting. He's like, "What? This isn't fair." He never complains. It's never cold. He's like, "What are you talking about? What's wrong with you? I can do this just fine." So,
Yeah, I wear long gloves when I'm usually setting in the river, and I have some friends, they call them, bitch gloves, right? Ultimately, but I also have Raynos, so I have like no circulation to my hands, and it can be downright super painful to be doing that. But the experience is different for everybody. But if you can hit that mark where you're painting can take anybody on any spectrum of like what their feeling is in that situation, trapping, hunting, just being outdoors is absolutely amazing. It, transitioning though, like in your biography, if anybody goes to your website, which I'll link in the bio so people can see your artwork on your Instagram as well, you talk about, or it's in prose and writing, the desire to preserve the dwindling understanding of the past, yesteryear. Can you talk a bit about that mindset and how your artwork is preserving that history, but potentially also prolonging it, for a new generation? What does that mean to you, preserving the past?
yeah, so uh, it was kind of one of those funny ideals, and it turns into an ideal. Like I said, because here we are in 2024, and the things I like to paint are I try to paint with an idea of almost timelessness, but it really is, it's the 1800s up to the early 1900s. There's this, there's still, exploration happening, and there's still an idea of the unknown that you're, traveling into, and the spirit of adventure, and the strenuous life, and uh, and we see it in the news, and it's hyper. How do you want to explain it? Say it. It's exaggerated in the news. How awful things can be, and but we do see examples where the past is being repeated, and the terrible parts of the past. And I think people are ignoring, like, oh, it's in the past. We don't need to know about these certain things. Well, I think we do, which is why we study history. But history slightly being rewritten. I mean, I can type things into Google now, and I don't get the same answers that I used to get a few years ago, because now everything is inclusive, and they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and people can't handle the truth, and it would shocks me because it's so important and so very interesting. I mean, people get upset. I actually never had anyone really be upset with my work, and I've had some friends and some Native Americans reach out and encourage me and say, "Don't stop what you're doing. If you ever need a defender, I'm your guy." I go, "Geez, great! This is great." Just because I love it so much, and I've talked about, I love the good history and I love the bad part of the history. And it's not that you love the bad parts, but of course there's going to be bad parts, and that way you can appreciate the good things that happen. And I'm grateful for all those things that have happened. And like I say, there's I think if everyone, had the same thoughts, read the same books, read the same everything, it'd be boring. And so there's this contrast of all these different things that have happened, and very interesting people when it comes to the Native American tribes that were here before, and their encounters and their battles and their struggle for life, and then you throw in early immigrants from Europe and their idea of expansion and winning of the West, and who was I was reading somebody, a recent Native American. He was talking about, what was he talking about? Someone was trying to be sympathetic, saying, "Oh, it's terrible that Europeans came and destroyed the Native Americans," which on its face, yes, is terrible. He goes, "No." He goes, "It was going to happen anyway. It was either going to be them or somebody else, somebody worse." He goes, "No matter what, it was going to, with the march of time, it was going to happen." And I think that's so true. And like I say, now that we're here, I think the best way is figure out the best way to share and to learn and to celebrate the best parts, and also remember the bad parts. And I think that's what helps motivate a society to be better than itself and constantly refine itself, to be better. And then when artwork, like I say, there's people that write books, there's people that teach classes on any kind of subjects. And I think artwork, I found myself in the art world because of my dad and his experiences. And then somehow I just ended up loving it. Like my older brother, he has been dabbled in art and a few other things, but we had the same dad, and he had a different interest, and he went this direction. And even my little brother, he works for Google in a certain capacity, and completely different than my interests. And my sister went into nursing, and joked that she, can't, all her art assignments, she had my dad help her on those in school. And so I found myself here, and I do love it, and I love sharing it, and again finding the other people that are that have a passion for it and enthusiasm for it, and the natural world really does call to me. And some of my favorite museums are the Natural History Museum in New York, and you see the big quote by Teddy Roosevelt, and you think, my goodness, this guy, I feel like he can see into the future. And another one of his friends, Carl Akeley, taxidermist that started the Chicago Field House, but ended up being responsible for the African wing at the Natural History Museum in New York, was where he and Teddy were responsible for saving the mountain gorilla after they were hunting them in the early 1900s. They said, "Oh my gosh, if the hunters, these are so easy to hunt, they will be wiped off the face of the earth unless we do something now." And they did something, and because of them, we have mountain gorillas still alive in Africa. And so there's, like I say, people can get mad at the hunters. I even had an argument with the president of the Explorers Club a few years ago, because they have all this wonderful, and I've only seen photographs. I've always wanted to visit, elephant tusks on the sides of the fireplace, and some awesome paintings, and then awesome old taxidermy of leopards and lions and different things. But they kind of look down upon the hunting aspect of the Explorers Club, and they don't allow hunters anymore in that capacity, because the hunters in the early days, really were naturalists and bringing back specimens to share with the rest of the world things that they'll never, at the time, going to Africa was you were there for a year. It wasn't just you could fly there and fly back, have a 21-day safari or something. And, but it turned into an argument based on hunting and conservation, and he didn't believe that hunting was conservation. And I said, you have photo shoots, you show off all this hunting, but you look down on it and don't appreciate it for what it actually is. And anyway, I think he blocked me, and we don't talk anymore. So
that's a good point. So one of the things you also said at the very beginning is you were growing up, you were hunting, you were trapping with your father, but you also said that you were kind of the neighborhood animal sanctuary for wildlife. I think there's a lot of misconceptions, and there's this dichotomy that I think a lot of people who never practice can't understand, how somebody who could kill and consume an animal, whether that's through hunting, trapping, or whatever means, could also be so enamored with animals to the point of building a career around painting these scenes or adopting animals and rehabilitating them. Can you give your best strike at, we're talking about this conservation, gene that most hunters, I do think, have. But can you help explain that dichotomy, at least maybe in the capacity of your family?
Like I say, it's been like we've had so many funny animals over the years. We've had kestrels that used to live in my dad's studio that we've rescued and lived in my dad's studio and would come and land on my head. Raptors up above, and we've had owls that people have brought to us that were injured, and owls are trickier than kestrels, that's for sure, to rehabilitate, because you almost have to force feed these little guys. And then we've, like I said, had hamsters. My dad had a pet badger growing up. And even right now, my dad's kind of guarding this silly set of ducks showed up in his backyard. Like, we're up in the foothills of the mountains. My dad has a pool, and in the latter part of the winter, they showed up, and then they never left. And my dad's like, "Oh, great! Now there's a nest of 13 eggs out there, and the drake and the hen are taking turns on the nest." And then my son has been swimming over there with his buddies, and my dad's like, "Don't." He's like, "Oh, great! What are we going to do with these dumb ducks?" And but he's kind of, even just over the years. I mean, he's, like I said, we've had antelope and deer, and my mom was always like, "No, we don't." Even though she says no, she always relents, because my dad just kind of the way he is, it just kind of certain things happen and things show up, and then she can't say no. And the one thing she does say no to is he's always wanted pigeons. He had pigeons as a kid, and she's like, "No pigeons." and and so yeah, it's kind of a funny when it comes to conservation. Sometimes it's kind of the people that we meet and the groups we meet, and the artwork has ended up lending itself to a lot of conservation efforts. And we're friends with a guy named Doug Seuss, and he's had grizzly bears, and his daughter's had a pack of wolves, and they live up in Heber, Utah. But his bear was one of the most famous bears, Bart the bear, that died about 20 something years ago now. And so when I was 21, he invited my dad and I to help. It's called the Vital Ground Foundation, and they help raise money for grizzly bear habitation. And so they'll buy up land, and they've put together over the years, my goodness, thousands, tens of thousands of acres to help expand on the grizzly bear, where they can live and roam, and so we've been able to, with artwork, it's been great to be able to help raise funds that way. And like I said, that opens up other doors and other avenues. My dad's also helped in Kenya at a place called Lewa with black rhino populations, and he's helped, Safari Club, donating, paintings and bronzes, and it's one of these funny things, because more and more hunters put, millions of dollars, especially in Africa and in North America, more than, say, the photographer who wants to go there and helps with conservation. For some reason, hunters are willing. My experience in Africa when I was 17, I remember seeing like abandoned farms out in the bush. I'm like, "What is this?" And then the professional hunter, he's like, "Oh, well, some of these, the people that live here will start these farms." He goes, "But what happens is the, zebras or, some kind of species of animals will come in and wreck and eat everything." And he says, "What ends up happening is the population will kill the animals with no tags that aren't being paid for, and that hurts the populations of the animals, and they're, because the people are growing, the populations are getting bigger, they're moving out more into the animals' habitat and territory, and then it's a lose-lose for the people and for the animals. And the hunting actually it keeps money funneled into the people, keeps wildlife management, the land open, and then the money goes to the right places. And I was at a table at a dinner in Texas once where meeting with dictators. He said some of the money was going to the wrong places, especially with certain, fundraising that had nothing to do with hunting would go to the government, and the dictators would turn over, and there was coups, and then they have to start all over with a new dictator. And they said it's just kind of insane. And I was listening to this going, "Oh my goodness." And so, like, the way that my dad and I have been able to help is, like, say, donating that way, and through hunting. And even the Duck Dynasty guys, when they talk about conservation, and I love those guys. And it was so funny when they first came online. I go, "Who are these crazy guys?" And then I went online and searched them out. And I'm like, "Oh, that funny guy who plays a dumb guy, he's a smart guy. His bachelor's or his master's degree or whatever, his PhD is in conservation." And I mean, those guys know what they're doing, and they saved they talk about, how many, uh, how important the migration patterns are, and under the flyways and all these places where they nest, and they have their baby, all the the new ducks and all the baby ducks and everything. And it's incredible the amount of land all these animals need. And if it's not there, and if it's turned into something else, and all the, like, my dad and I, it always bums me out. All the rivers we used to fish and trap are all piped over now. Like, there's no, in the name of safety, they want kids falling in. And I don't remember how many kids were actually falling into these places. Um, but all these habitats are, gone. And I even read, because I remember with my dad too, school projects, we'd go find milkweed and raise monarch butterflies, and find those funny little caterpillars. I look for those on my hikes, and I hardly see any monarchs anymore. And then I read an article that talked about the decline of the monarch population. I go, oh man. And I mean, there's always going to be progress, and people are always going to be the product of population growth. And it's just kind of crazy how to balance all these things, the right way. But yeah, hunters definitely, there's so many great articles that talk about how hunters are actually, they put their money where their mouths are, and their mouths are money where, anyway.
And I think that's the truth. And it's often portrayed as the opposite, right? That we're out,
Yeah,
pillaging the land versus renewing and, strategically taking resources that are renewable. And I think, trappers specifically have that extra intimate tie to the land for the amount of, like you said, time and detail that goes into targeting whatever animal you're after. And you get all these kind of tertiary exposures. Like if you're after raccoons, you're probably trying to figure out where the ground nesting birds are. If you're, after beaver, you're trying to figure out where these ponds are being built up, and, flooding areas that may need some riparian repair, may not. And you become this real, 21st century caricature of like what a mountain man is. And with that, have you done recently any kind of like modern trapping work, or like tagged along with anybody, or reopened some of your own trap lines to kind of reconnect with what it means to be a 21st century trapper?
a little bit. I wish I could say I've done more. And what's funny mentioning this, so on Monday we're going up to our friend's place up the canyon, Provo Canyon, up a canyon called Diamond Fork. And our friend was saying, he goes, "Oh, I think there's some muskrats." And my son has wanted to trap a muskrat in the worst way. And it's always like, he reminds us in summertime, and we're like, "Oh, let's do this in the fall and find places in the wintertime." And because some of my old places, I was just telling my daughter, I picked her up from some friend's house the other day, and where there's a strip mall was this fantastic little ranch that used to be there, the Bar M Ranch, where I used to go as a kid and shovel the stalls. And my dad and I, there were mink over there were raccoons over there, and muskrats. And we'd, like I said, before school, we'd wander across it's 4-lane road now, it used to be 2-lane road. We'd go, have campfires at the end of the night, and we used to go shoot bows and arrows, but that's not there anymore, and it's kind of a bummer. Now, like I said, now there's just from strip malls, and like across that place, there's a development called Pheasant Green that used to have pheasants. And there used to be a lot more horse pastures, and it's just kind of crazy to me to like say the progress of all the places we used to go are just gone. And even my dad talks about, "Oh, we got to go find some frogs." Even when I was a little kid, he always, "Let's go catch some frogs." We never found any frogs. Always, there used to be some over here all the time. And he goes, "There used to be like a little swamp over here." Well, that swamp is a parking lot. And so up the canyon, it's just a matter of, we've looked and haven't seen any signs of them, but now there are, and we're going to go see if we can't set a trap. I think it's still, I mean, it's springtime, but he still might have a good coat. This muskrat that's in this guy's pond up the canyon.
I gotta ask. So for your son, is this the same son we saw walk behind you
Yes.
a little while ago? In today's age, right, there are fewer and fewer teenagers who might become jazzed up around potentially trapping a muskrat. What's the drive for him? Is it because you used to trap muskrats with your dad? Does he want to be able to make muskrat mittens? Like, what's the driving force behind this kind of excitement, which is awesome, by the way, and I'm glad you're supporting it.
So my son is a unique kid as well. Like he loves sculpting and he loves drawing, and so he's had great examples with my dad and myself and my dad too. Like being a sculptor, my dad recently, a few years ago, finished up a life-size bronze of a buffalo for the Golden Spike 250-year, I think it was what, sesquicentennial up at Iron Point in Utah, and then also a couple more up at the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody, Wyoming. And my son got to help him like put the clay all over it and do things, and he was probably better than my dad's assistant when it came to helping my dad with that particular bronze. And so we've made sure to take him, just like my dad took me out in the woods and trapping and fishing, and we've made sure to do that with my son and daughter. And even my son, we took my son on a buffalo hunt a few years ago, and he got to shoot his first. I haven't even shot a buffalo. He shot a buffalo, and I was going to be his backup shot, and I was trying to film it. And while I was I got my gun ready, got my rifle ready, and I was trying to get the camera, and all of a sudden he was all lined up, and he shot before I was ready, and it was a 256-yard shot. And then my dad goes, "Hey, you should probably put another." And then the second round, right before my dad could finish the sentence, put a second round in him, and that buffalo took 2 steps and just tipped over. I couldn't believe. And my son plays airsoft, and so I think he was perfectly great. I mean, we practiced with him, and he was a good shot. And then, geez, that was, and I was worried. I don't know if you remember. There's a funny. So when I was 12 years old, my dad took me to British Columbia to go moose hunting. And I remember being 12, and I think I'd been deer hunting a few times with my dad, but never shot a deer. And do you remember the show Silver Spoons? There was a deer hunting scene with Ricky Schroeder, and he pulls the trigger and wounds the deer, and he can't do it, and he's all freaked out. And it was funny. I had that come to mind when I was shooting my moose, and I kind of laughed at it in my head and shot the moose. And I'll send you some pictures of me with my first moose. But like I said, my son didn't hesitate, was excited, and he also loves historical, loves everything kind of like World War II, World War I. He goes back into the Depression War and the Boer Wars, and he just watched Charge of the Light Brigade with my dad. He just gravitates toward history, and I always make sure there's books for him to read, and I kind of give him assignments sometime, and I always try to make him fun assignments. But when we're skinning this buffalo, my goodness, like I say, pulling the trigger is the easy part. When it comes to hunting, there's work to be done, and I've been offered, cow elk hunts and doe tags. I'm like, yeah, how much work do I feel I'm like doing this week, And then butchering it, of course, too. And my dad and I, over the years, my dad gets right in there and goes for it, and yeah, it's work for sure. But we're pulling out the stomach, and he's looking at all the veins and all the guts, and so he made sure to take all kinds of funny pictures of things for reference materials for his. He likes to do war movies, and what he, like I say, his enthusiasm for just kind of gravitates towards like historical things, but if somehow the muskrats popped into his brain that's something he really wanted to do, and my dad's been trying to make sure that happens. And I just before I talked to you, I said, and he called me about trapping actually, and I mentioned, he goes, "What? Wait, the guy wants to know about trapping? What is this?" And I kind of explained, "Oh, that's great." And I said, "Well," I said, "do we know where our muskrat traps are? Because it's been a little while." He goes, "Oh yeah, I know just where they are." And I bought some on eBay of all funny things. I bought some stretcher boards because I remember having them as a kid, and they disappeared from my dad's old house to his new house in the move somewhere. I'm sure my mom threw them away somewhere. But then we have a stack of stretcher boards, but yeah, like I say, we still have quite a few traps, waiting to be set again. So.
Well, I'm sure after this comes out, you might have some of our Utah trapping listeners who probably will reach out and be like, "Come on my line. Your son wants to get some muskrats. Come on out." So,
so I wouldn't say no to that.
Yeah. So anybody listening in the Provo area or in the greater Utah area, reach out. But, one question I do want to ask, because I think my observation is that your family generationally has done a fantastic job of exposing the youth of the family to hunting, to trapping in a way that did not deter you. I think a lot of my friends, myself included, I have young kids right now. I started a little later in life. Is my biggest fear is turning them off by bringing them out on a line when you are cold, when you are doing these things. Like, do you have any like quick takeaway advice for people who want to take their kids out, want to make sure that it's a good time and that it's a positive experience they can build on versus a negative one?
What I think is, yeah, that's funny you mention it like that. See, and over the years too, my dad, we talked about being miserable sometimes. Sometimes being miserable and cold are some of the best memories you come away with. I think if it was everything was comfy and nice and like that's everything else, right? And my when I was 21, my friends and I went to Iceland, and they wanted to do, they're ice climbers, and I was excited to take photographs and do kind of ice climbing. But I was excited just to go to Iceland. But we managed to go on one of the warmest winters on record in Iceland, and but we got stuck. We decided to, while we had some time looking for ice, we decided, well, and we didn't have enough money to rent one of those fantastic, Land Cruisers with the big tires and everything. That would have been cool. We rented like basically a Toyota Corolla with all our gear loaded on top of the car, inside the car, and I was jammed in the back, and we drove to the middle of the island. We were trying to reach Hekla, the big volcano, and all these signs were like, "Don't go this way. You need a snorkel. You need this car." We're like, well, we'll see how far we can make it. Well, we managed to try to forge over a frozen river, and as we get to about the middle of it, our car just went down into it. We're like, oh no. Well, we were stuck for 12 or 14 hours, and I have it on. I took like 8 cameras. It was before iPhones and everything, but I had a video camera, I had film cameras, and so I documented the process. But we were there forever. I don't know how, to this day I don't really know how we got out. We got the jack under the car in the water, jacked ourselves up, and then kind of went foot by foot until we were out of there. And my friends and I, we joke about it, how miserable that was, but that made it very memorable. Like I said, that was cold. We were wet. There was no place to get dry, out in the middle of nowhere. And but some of these instances, and then another funny time. So sometimes it's just a matter. I think it's a matter of how the. And one thing I always remind my kids too when they are doing hard things is I always remind them that they can do hard things, and that we can do hard things. And we joke about not quitting, and everybody else quits, but do we quit? And we don't quit. And I try to encourage that, and then I think that helps them feel better about themselves, builds confidence that, oh yeah, I can do hard things, and where we live too, our church, we do some service projects sometimes with fathers and sons, and kids come out, and sometimes, as kids do, they screw around, and I just make sure my kid's not the one screwing around. He goes, "Hey, how come we're the only ones doing this?" I'm like, because because we know how to do this, and we're not screwing around.
I love that. There's a guy, Jim Ramos, who has a program called Men in the Arena, and one of his principles for being a strong man or a strong woman, it is that hardship, but it's also finishing strong. Like, you can do stuff, you can do hard things, but you don't quit. You finish strong no matter what, even if that's limping across. And I think trapping inevitably will bring that out, especially if you're taking your kids. Like, I've taken my daughter out she's 3, and it's cold, it's snowy, it's wet, but she loves it. And there's hard times, and then at the end she's happy, and she talks about it glowingly afterwards. I think that's amazing. Kind of as we, or go ahead.
I can say one thing that I do remember got me excited as a kid. I'm remembering like going out in the early evenings to set the traps, and my dad's like, "Oh, we'll come back here in the morning and we'll see if we get anything," And like, look, here's some signs here, and he would show me, the little scent stick that we had, and I think we used, what is it? We had a few little scents that we used, and we would put it there, and he had me smell it, and we'd put it back in the mud, and we'd do a few things, and then it was always so fun to walk up, quietly and sneak up on to see if we'd gotten anything. And that, as a kid, like, oh, the promise of something being in the trap was one of the coolest feelings, I think. And that helped me want to go back more. And sometimes he'd go out without me, and then he's like, "Oh, do you want to go up with me to see if, where I set some traps?" I'm like, "Yes." Even though I wasn't initially part of it, I got to be part of it on the second part. And that made it really fun. No matter You ignored the cold, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, as an adult, that's still the most exciting thing. Like if I'm walking up to a wolf trap, even if there's nothing in there, that excitement you feel, I can't imagine the tenfold feeling it must be as a child because I didn't start till I was an adult. But yeah, no, that's a great point. I think for people listening, if you are involving kids, to think about those elements of the excitement and drawing them in to make it a pleasant, and I mean, not necessarily pleasant, but pleasant even in an uncomfortable situation, which trapping, hunting, especially out west, always is. Um, one question I always ask every guest: you've spent a lifetime in the woods. What's the craziest thing you've ever come across out in the woods?
There's quite a few funny things I've come across for sure. A funny one a recent one that I can remember. My wife and I were on a hike up just up Rock Canyon, like I say, we're up on the East Bench on the Wasatch Front. We're on a little hike, and we had to hike. We're almost the last street before it's the mountains, which is also why it's so fantastic to live where we live. Is we can on our hikes, on our runs, we go right out, and we're on the Bonneville shoreline, a trail that leads right into Rock Canyon. We come up out of a dirt trail, and there's a parking lot, and then it goes back into the dirt trail again. But there was so much blood. I was like, something died. It looked like a murder scene just in the parking lot. And then there's drag marks off into the bushes. And I'm like, all right, what are we gonna see? Like, is there gonna be a human being over there? Like, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And sadly, it was just a deer. But man, it probably an hour old to kill. Early in the morning. It was impressive. Like so, we've seen mountain lion tracks on our driveway. Um, this is kind of funny. This is not even being in the woods. This is kind of crazy. So we're getting ready for our kids to be in school, and I walked out onto our driveway, and there was probably like just 8 deer, mule deer, looking at me. I'm like, that's so cool. And then there was like 3 cottontail rabbits on my hillside too as well. And then I saw a covey of quail wandering. I'm like, what is this? And then in the background, coyotes started howling. I was like, what is this? And so I ran inside, grabbed my family, came out to look at all the animals that were in our backyard. And just then, either a Cooper's hawk or a red-tailed hawk flew down and tried to nail one of the rabbits, but it missed. And the rabbits could be like, we're just a little unconcerned, just kind of just hopped away a little bit. And then this hawk falcon was like walking up the hill trying to get to him. I'm like, what is this? This is nuts. And that was kind of a funny one.
It's like a Disney movie.
It was like a funny Disney movie. And I think a lot of times some of the best experiences, like you just need to, some people, I think it's easy, like this modern day comfort, it's an illusion. Air conditioning, heating, they're great, but that's not how everything was always have been. And you watch old shows sometimes about the Scottish Highlands or something, and Braveheart, they're sleeping on the floor. I mean, you wake up, you're gonna be cold, like really cold. Humid cold is cold, and it's funny to some of these experiences you have, hunting, like you purposely put yourself out in the woods, and you need to survive sometimes. And even as a Boy Scout, some of my funny experiences and encounters with bears, like I had a funny scout masters that brought out, trail mix in a big bucket and left it on the picnic table that night. And he said, oh, this is for you guys throughout the week. You can just come home and put it in your pocket. I mean, that didn't last a night. We came home, that morning, the bucket was torn apart, all the trail mix eaten, and then the bear left, a pile of scat for us, to look at. And the rest of the camp up in northern Idaho, that bear kept visiting our camp and seeing what we left behind for him, yeah, just being out. I've come across quite a few lion kills. Yeah, there's been some, like even in Africa, we're in our Land Cruiser, we fell in an ant bear hole, like a 10 foot. All of a sudden we're driving along and in the bush, and then no roads, and then all of a sudden we're almost straight up and down in a hole. I'm trying to think, and then even my dad's had some funny stories where there was in the cook's cabin in Vancouver, or I'm just trying to think. My dad painted a little painting of it. The aftermath. A bear was tormenting the cook in his cabin, And so they said, hey, can you guys, while you're here, take care of this bear for me? They said, okay, yeah, we'll come in. It comes in at night, about 2 a.m. It gets under the cabin and is messing with the floorboards, and I'm freaked out. It's going to come get me. So all right. He says, so we hooked up some kind of cable to alert us to his presence. So we got up, and my dad's hunting buddy, and he got under the floorboards of the cabin with their rifles, and they turn on their flashlight. And he says, instead of just 2 eyes sitting back at him, there was 2 sets of eyes looking at him. So it was 2 bears. And they went, whoa, and turned off the lights. And then they said, okay, you get the one on the left, I'll get the one on the right. And he says, they turned on the light and they both shot. He goes, just because of the confined space, the muzzle blast, just dust and percussion, they couldn't hear anything. And then the light went out, and then shuffling around. And then they're, oh, great, now what just happened? Because they're in the pitch dark. And then they waited till the morning, and they went back, and there were the 2 bears they drug out of underneath this little cabin. But I have a pretty cool little painting my dad did. It's kind of a self-portrait, but he kind of made it look like somebody else. But there's these 2 bears that he's holding in this painting, and that are really cool. And so, so part of it is, like I say, I don't know if they're crazy experiences or just interesting, fun experiences that you come across. And
yeah, it's inevitable when you spend that much time, but those are all great. So, kind of with time wrapping up, I always like to end with a hypothetical. So I was kind of trying to think of one to give to you to make a decision between. And we didn't get to touch on artificial intelligence and how that's affecting the art world, but it's kind of wrapped up in this hypothetical. So would you rather have to give up creating art altogether, meaning seeing and interacting with it, or live in a world where you still have art that you can interact with, but it's only AI generated? So essentially, give it up altogether, or still have it where it's just an AI generated art world.
Those both sound like awful.
See, my hypotheticals always suck. There's no good choice.
What's funny is I was talking to a friend last night, and we're talking about gratitude and some other funny things, and about what kids, what skills kids need these days. At 21, entering the job market. I have a nephew who is applied for an internship. It was some kind of manufacturing, but it was worldwide shipping something. I can't remember exactly what the job was, but the internship was for 4 years at $11 an hour. But once you get the 4 years in, then they'll open up the job to you for like a worldwide position, to where they might send you anywhere. He was telling his mom, he goes, well, I can work at Taco Bell for $17 an hour right now and make a little bit more money. Or he goes, or a 4-year internship for $4 or $11 an hour. He goes, this seems like nuts, right? And I go, that does seem insane to me. And then my friend and I were talking about, what skills and like we're talking about how great Boy Scouts, how it used to be, learning. I mean, all these funny skills, these merit badges you learn are individual skills that create a functioning human being or man, if you want to call, that gives you life skills, to where you know how to get things done, time management, and we talked about cultivating and gratitude and being grateful for all the little things and the big, even the hardships, being grateful for the hardships in your life to make you the best person that you can be. And he goes, oh, have you ever used Chat GPT? It can help prompt you with all kinds of ideas that maybe you didn't think about. And I go, no. I said, I haven't. I said, part of me just, and even some of the artwork that I see created by AI is kind of creepy and looks soulless to me. Like, that's my experience and understanding of it. And I'm sure people have created all kinds of weird, crazy things that human beings themselves couldn't come up with. And I know why, because it doesn't have a soul. But even this morning, I downloaded ChatGPT, just the app, and I started asking it questions. And some of it were kind of run-of-the-mill answers that I was getting. Oh, gratitude, be empathetic and do this and do that and be grateful. And then I talked about, I was thinking about kind of, what goes into creating a civilization and what you need, men and women in their, specific roles as men, and, actual men and actual women. And I'm not trying to be, mean to anybody. And it says, and it talked about, and this Chat GPT, I could see its bias, its woke bias. It was very strange. And I found myself arguing with it, because it was saying, oh, regardless of gender, men and women are equally capable of certain jobs and out in the workforce, and they need to do that. And I said, yes. I said, that might be true. I said, but I said, if you don't have children, and it kept forcing immigration into the civilization, like, you need immigration to help with labor and jobs that need to be filled. And I said, listen, I said, if you're creating a civilization, why are we bringing in another civilization to do the jobs of functioning? I said, if we're looking for functioning human beings and skills necessary, and the things that, oh, I see your point, but that's a cop-out answer in my opinion. It's like, well, that's not even an answer. That's not addressing the question I just prompted. And this is where I get a problem with AI and artificial intelligences, and especially the people that have, programmed it. I think that's the hardest part. If it was a true artificial intelligence with no bias, maybe I could see it's hard. And so you have to steer clear of its bias, which is hard because I think when it comes to traditional skills and not discounting, I think the world tends to discount what the actual role of women are, and it tries to make people feel bad about, men and women feel bad about the plight of women, when it needs to be giving, I think, them more credit for what they're able to do with, biologically, and our brains are so different, and the chemicals and hormones that run through each of our bodies is so different. I think there needs to be more credit given to women and men in their specific roles, and that's where I think the conversation needs to start. Not so much all the funny things we see in on the news, and people trying to be equitable, but disregarding so many other aspects of what it is to be a functioning human being. And in the part, like if something happened to the infrastructure, or an EMP or something happened, I think a lot of people would have zero skills to keep themselves alive. Important, basic, skills, and that aspect shocking to me. And I think that's why I think hunting and all these traditional skills that people dismiss, and it's not even that everyone needs to be a mountain man or go trapping, but just the understanding of
How the world works.
how the world actually works, and as
Yeah.
opposed to the weird world we live in now with computers, giving us weird answers
Well,
to
that
basic questions.
the computers and like the bumpers that just society has given to us. And I'm going to send you my book, but people listening know the answer. That was me. I was that guy. I worked in AI for the longest time, and I was a suburbanite. I didn't grow up hunting, trapping, fishing, or anything. I didn't start till my 30s when I had my eyes opened, and I was like, oh, what am I missing? Like, I am missing the core fundamental makeup of how to be at least marginally self-reliant, because I was relying on everything else. And that was eye-opening. I think a lot more people are coming to that realization. But with that, Nicholas, I want to thank you first and foremost. I learned a ton. Can you tell people who are listening, like, where they can find out more about you, your artwork, anything that you have going on that you'd like people to be privy to?
Oh yeah. So like the easiest place to find me is probably my website, and I do try to update it once a month, which is, I'm terrible at that kind of stuff. So, but I'm being better lately. It's May 4th, and I haven't quite updated my website for this month, but I'm going to. I have a plan to do that. Yeah, and just nicholascolemanart.com. And then there are some museum shows that I'm a part of up in Jackson Hole at the Wildlife Museum, and down in Texas, and a few other places. And I try to put events that are coming up on my website, and there's a biography there and a few examples of my work, and if anyone has any questions, I think my email's on there, and if anyone ever happens to be in Utah, I try to keep my studio open for visits, and I think that's the best way to help share, whether they're buying anything or not, to help share my enthusiasm and their enthusiasm, and have a place to, like I say, have a conversation like this, and thank you for reaching out, by the way. And it's always fun to talk with like I say, like-minded people, and help further, the conversation that sometimes you wonder what in the world you're doing, sometimes doing all these things that seem antiquated and seem, because in college I ran up against professors who were telling me what I'm doing has already been done. And I had to remind them, I said, well, it hasn't been done by me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing it completely different than those guys. And I wish I could have those guys' experience and have be Albert Bierstadt or even Thomas Moran wandering through Utah for the first time in the late 1870s and being able to see Utah County without a single house in it. And one kind of fun fact about Provo, Utah, it's the namesake is for a French fur trapper who came through here in 1820, Etienne Provost, who got held captive by the Shoshone Indians up Provo Canyon, which is about 10 minutes from my house. And I think there's even a website dedicated to him and his story. But a few of his party were killed by the Indians, and he escaped, never to return to Provo ever again. And all the fantastic towns that are on the Wasatch Front, Murray, Ogden, Draper, these are all trappers that at some point came through Utah, and there's a rich trapping history in Utah, of all funny things. So,
well, that and in the West is what it was founded on. So, Nicholas, again, thank you. Everybody, go check it out. Reach out, Utah Trappers. Reach out if you want to take Nicholas and his son out on your line. And until next time, have a great week, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.